Well, how could I forget Stupor Mundi? Sixth Crusade, which we don't play, one of the more successful crusades in a lot of ways because it retook Jerusalem, something that really hadn't happened. Jerusalem fell once to the Crusaders in the First Crusade, and then before the Third Crusade it fell. Well, Frederick II, Emperor of Germany, at the time excommunicated because he hadn't fulfilled his crusading vow, rather than trying to negotiate with the Pope and saying, yes, I'll go fulfill it or whatever, just heads out, negotiates with Saladin. Actually, I don't know if it's with Saladin. Saladin was dead before Richard was. So, let me see if I have a year here. I thought it was with Saladin. Anyhow, he negotiates with the Ayyubid Sultan and is given Jerusalem. Jerusalem's not worth much. Remember, it's been reduced to a castle here. It's not the city it once was. And then Frederick proceeds to crown himself King of Jerusalem and goes home. Well, after that, Jerusalem changes hands a few times, but eventually ends up back in Muslim hands. And here is the last real crusade with a goal of perhaps retaking Jerusalem. But the reality, well, so this is St. Louis's crusade. Although, does he show up in a later one? I'm not sure. I don't know. I think he did multiple crusades, actually, but they may have all been encompassed in this one greater crusade. Anyhow, this one was again a target of Egypt, but what's interesting in this one is his landing in Egypt triggers, to some extent, the Mamluk revolt, which sort of splits the Muslim Near East into two camps. You have, again, a Shia rulership in Egypt and a Sunni rulership in the rest of the territory. The way this is handled, you still have a lot of freedom in this game. You can choose where to land Louis. You can choose what to do. But like the last one, there's a slight bonus for directing it to Egypt, but your hand's really not forced. And what you end up with is this huge Ayyubid empire, really stretching across everything. Facing the Christian powers are really just the crusade itself, which is mainly here at Limassol, but some of it's late in coming in the Mediterranean. And the Kingdom of Jerusalem, which is now centered in Cyprus, actually, even though they still own Acre and, some territory along the coastal area. They don't have Jerusalem anymore, and Acre is not seen as tenable enough to serve as the kingdom's capital any longer. Now, for miners, we have a kind of powerful little Armenia here. It's got like 4 units and a pretty decent leader. And that's available likely as a pro-Christian aid. And the other thing is, when the revolt happens, one of the two sides ends up being pro-Christian. Now, this is kind of weird, and I think it's fitted into the cards from my little glance at them, which is that the leaders who become the Mamluk revolt show up. Baibur, for example, and a new sultan as well who can be removed. And thus, what historically happened, which was the Mamluks after the revolt actually destroyed Louis's army and captured his army, and then starved most of them to death. I think the way that's represented in the game is there's sort of this pre-revolt possibility from some of the events. And then from the other side, there's the revolution itself, one's counterattack, which is this card, which is going to give you the Baibor's leader, etc. Well, that's the real Mamluk revolution, but this indicates the split. And historically, I believe the Mamluks concluded a treaty with Louis, and he went on to go attack Damascus and the Ayyubids. And, well, then a peace was signed between them, the Mamluks and the Ayyubids, and there was nothing to cover Louis's rear. But on the other hand, he wasn't really facing the Egyptians either. They kept their truce there. So that's what we're going to be representing. Eventually, you can see the two Muslim powers are likely to align to each other, but when this card is played, whichever one, and it's not necessarily going to be the Mamluks, whichever one Louis, it's sort of a random choice with one exception, which is if the Christians control Cairo, the Mamluks automatically are pro-Christian, and if they control Damascus, the Ayyubids are going to be pro-Christian. Now, for victory points, we start off with the Ayyubids holding some 17 victory points, and the Christians only holding 7. For victory in this game, the Christians have to get 12 victory points if they hold Cairo. And they actually, I believe, have to hold it. I'm not sure. And also the Christians will win an automatic victory if they get Damascus and Cairo both at the same time. Now, I think if a Christian-aligned Mamluk, or Ayyubid for that matter, is sitting in Cairo, the Christians still get that benefit. But it's very specific, they don't get the victory points for any territories held by their Muslim ally in this case. So that's a little twist, and again, it's not defined as well as I would like it, but by a strict reading of the rules, that's what I get. It doesn't state that the Cairo issue goes away. If the Christians don't have Cairo, like in the last scenario, they need 13 victory points. So it's a 1 victory point difference, which one they hold. Now, if the Muslims have 17 or more victory points, that's what their target is at the end of the game. But if the Mamluk revolution occurs, and the Muslim player is the Mamluks as their primary power, he has to have 5 victory points, which is he just has to keep Egypt. If he ends up being the Ayyubids, he has to have 12 victory points, which is the remainder of the territory. And, either way, he has to hold with his portion of the old Sultanate, regardless of any occurrence within the revolt. This is only a 5-turn game, so, it's possible that we might not see some of these events. However, no, it looks like these aren't mandatory. The Caliph Mediates is mandatory if the revolution's in play. And that'll fix if there's a Muslim power aligned with the Christians. But other than that, it has very little effect. All right. I don't know if we'll get started tomorrow morning because I gotta start work early, actually. Well, the game opens up badly for the Crusaders. They played a 3-point card to try to move Louis down to Damietta, and the Muslims are able to play a crusade delayed, preventing that movement. Right? Wait. Cancel activation. Yeah. Oh, in the Mediterranean or Constantinople boxes. Ooh, they can't play that. Okay. So the landing there is going to happen. But then the Muslims, and I'll figure out what happens with the fort. The Muslims play Trouble in Europe, and that removed Burgundy and only one Crusader, but still, it's stripping one of the leaders, which is probably the bigger factor. So the call to surrender at Damietta was successful, as it was historically, and now Louis is entrenched there. It's back on the Christian play. After the Crusaders established their siege at Cairo, a number of siege cards were played, but on the Muslim turns, and that was on the one Christian turn after, on the Muslim turns, what we're seeing is they keep playing cards that add 2 new units, even in the siege. The Mujahideen card and the, way back here before the Madras pre-Jihad. Those could have been used to strengthen Aleppo and then move down and maybe start capturing stuff. But making Cairo full of troops, at this point it can't just surrender. So it's forcing Louis, if he wants Cairo, to actually attack it, and may end up calling off this whole campaign because it's just too filled with units. Hard to tell. Well, pushing through the end of the turn for these cards, the Crusaders continued with their siege of Cairo, but the incremental troops that the Muslims were receiving, that makes it almost impossible to take, especially without a blockade there, because the Muslims can keep filtering more things in terms of replacements, etc. Of course, a blockade's hard to set because they have the same value number of troops. The Crusaders pulled one extra. They got an additional Crusaders arrive, which they dropped one into Acre and one down here. For the Muslims, they consolidated their forces, stripping them out of all the cities, and moved down to siege Tiberias. That's a Templar fortress. Even if they succeed in holding the siege, though, they're going to only have 3 units down there. Of course, the leader, Henry of Cyprus, is only able to command 2, so he can't attack with a huge force anyhow. I'll do the demobilization and come back. Well, the Muslims had to demobilize the force they had sieging Tiberias there. And we're moving into the next turn. Christians were able to demobilize one of the Jerusalem units over here in Famagusta. They still got a Crusader unit out in the Med. Going to be kind of a pain to bring into play because there's only one thing. There's no leader. It just is kind of, well, I don't want to use a 3-point card to pull them in. It's automatic naval access with a 3-point card, but that's an expensive card to bring one unit into play. The Mamluk Revolution was played, so we're going to have a reshuffling of the decks, and we'll move into the second turn.